The sky that morning was a gentle shade of sorrow. Not dark, not angry, just quietly gray, like a sigh too soft to be heard. Rain had not yet fallen, but the world held its breath. At the edge of the village, by a moss-covered stone wall, stood the old willow tree. Her arms forever bowed, as if in prayer. Her hair, long and silver green, brushing the earth, like she was always reaching for something lost. No one remembered who had planted the tree. Some said it had been there since before the village was born. Others whispered that the willow had wandered, sprung from the dreams of a sorrowful goddess, and rooted itself, with earth most needed tenderness. Children had once climbed her limbs, tied ribbons to her branches, sung lullabies into her hollows. But now, the willow stood alone. Only one person still visited her, a quiet girl named Lenny, who wore her heart in her eyes and her silence like a shawl. Lenny came every morning, rain or frost, sun or storm, carrying a small wooden journal and a pencil dulled by time. She never spoke to the tree, but she would sit on the curved root that had grown just wide enough for one person. The next morning, the rain had stilled, but the earth held its echo, soft and fragrant, like the hush after a lullaby. Mist curled in silver threads across the ground, and the sky looked like wet parchment, waiting for a story to be written. Lenny returned to the old willow tree. She carried no journal today, only the golden leaf, now dry, yet still warm, as if it held a pulse. She placed it on the root where she always sat. The leaf quivered gently, though there was no breeze. The willow's branches leaned closer than before. Lenny noticed it now. The tree was changing. Tiny shoots had begun to sprout near the base, tender and green, like thoughts newly born. The bark glistened faintly, as if lit from within. She crouched near the trunk and laid a hand against it. A sound faint, deep, like a murmur rose from beneath the bark. Not quite a voice, not quite wind, but something in between. Lenny closed her eyes, and then she heard it. Not with her ears, but with something older than listening. A memory that wasn't hers began to bloom. A girl stood where Lenny now stood, but the tree was small, only a sapling. She sang to it, a melody older than language, braided with sorrow and light. Behind her, the fields shimmered with golden wheat. Her dress was simple. Her hands were stained with ink. She hummed stories into the wind, and the wind carried them into the willow. Grow with kindness, she whispered. Bend, but never break. And the tree did. Lenny gasped, pulling her hand away. The memory faded like breath on glass. She looked down. The golden leaf had vanished, but in its place, where it had touched the root, a faint symbol now glowed, a spiral of raindrops etched into the bark. She reached toward it again, and this time, she didn't feel alone. Something beneath the roots had awakened. Not a presence that demanded, but one that waited. Patient, curious, kind. Lenny leaned back, heart trembling with what had she just witnessed. The mist thickened. Out from it came a figure, an old woman, cloaked in a patchwork of moss and linen, her eyes the color of river stones, her footsteps silent as snowfall. She said nothing at first. She simply looked at the willow, then at Lenny, then at the faint mark glowing beneath her feet. Finally, she spoke, her voice like leaves brushing glass. You heard her. Lenny nodded. She chose you. The tree remembers. The woman knelt, touched the bark, and whispered words that made the mist shiver. There is more beneath than branches, she said. This willow is a keeper of echoes. Lenny frowned. Echoes, the woman smiled faintly. When grief is poured into soil, and stories into seed trees, remember, this one has carried centuries of soft pain, and you have listened. She stood slowly. You'll need to come again. There are deeper roots, and some memories are buried far below the rain. And just like that, she turned and walked into the mist, vanishing between one heartbeat and the next. Lenny stood still for a long time. The rain didn't return that day, but the silence left behind was full, with questions, with wonder, with a strange new courage. She looked up at the willow's branches. They were swaying without wind, and somewhere beneath her feet, in a place deeper than dreams, the old roots stirred, ready to speak again, to the wind weaving stories through the branches, to the soil humming old lullabies, to the breath of the willow as it bent toward her, as if it remembered her mother, or her grandmother, or some kind voice from long ago. This morning, as Lenny sat beneath the tree, the drizzle began. So soft. It was almost a memory, as though the rain had forgotten how to fall and was relearning it. One shy drop at a time, she closed her eyes and tilted her face upward. It was the kind of rain that didn't demand shelter, only attention. The willow swayed gently, not to escape the rain, but to greet it. Its long fingers traced slow circles in the air, drawing invisible stories, as if dancing with ghosts. Lenny opened her journal and began to write. Drizzle over the old willow. Not cold, not cruel, just a whisper of something returning. She paused. The scent of damp bark, crushed moss, and something older like memory made of water wrapped around her. The rain picked up, a little steadier now, but still tender. The kind of rain that healed things. Beneath the shelter of the willow's canopy, Lenny barely felt it, yet she saw a tiny silver line stitching the world together. And for a moment, the tree did something it had not done in years. It trembled not from wind or weight, but from a feeling too ancient to name. A single golden leaf out of season, out of place, drifted down from the highest branch and landed beside Lenie's foot. She stared at it, surprised. All the other leaves were green or turning brown, but this one glowed softly, like autumn remembered. She picked it up, turned it over. There was something etched into its veins. Not word. Exactly. Not runes. But the shapes felt familiar, like the lullabies her grandmother used to hum when the world outside was too loud. She pressed the leaf into her journal, closed the book slowly, reverently. I hear you, she whispered. The only words she had spoken that day. Maybe the only ones she needed. Above her, the willow seemed to bow lower, the drizzle tracing silver trails down its trunk like old tears returning home. The sky brightened barely, not sun, but the suggestion of it, a kindness behind the clouds. Lenny rose, one hand on the bark. It was warm. She walked back toward the village, the rain following her, like a song that did not want to end. Behind her, the willow stood taller. Something had changed, not broken, not healed, just opened, as if the tree, the rain, the girl, and the silence between them had agreed on something without speaking it aloud. That evening, the drizzle returned, this time over the whole village, and the villagers most, too hurried to notice the old tree, too occupied with roofs and firewood, stopped for a moment because they heard something, a kind of music in the rain, and someone said, I swear, I saw the old willow shimmer, and someone else replied, it's just the light, the mist. But Lenny knew, somewhere in her wooden journal, pressed between pages, was a golden leaf that did not fade, and in her dreams that night, the willow spoke in rainfall, and the rain carried her dreams to the roots of things older than sorrow and gentler than time. The dawn after the rain broke slowly, like a secret, peeling back to sky. Golden mist curled in the hollows of the land, and the willow stood quiet, its limbs heavy with dew and memory. Lenny returned before the sun fully rose. The second golden leaf pressed between her palms like a compass made of silence. The spiral on the bark had faded now, but the place still pulsed, faint and steady, like a heart buried beneath centuries. She knelt before the tree, brushed her fingers across the soil, and whispered, You asked me to go deeper. And the earth, ever listening, answered. A faint crack echoed from within the trunk, not of breaking, but of opening. One of the knots near the base, a hollow she'd never noticed before, shifted. The bark seemed to peel back of its own will, revealing a small cavern within. Inside, soft earth, a glimmer of old roots, and a faded piece of woven cloth wrapped around something. Lenny reached in. She unwrapped it slowly, layer by layer. Within the folds was a small wooden pendant, weathered and etched with a symbol she hadn't seen before. Inverted, with a tiny circle at its heart. As soon as her fingers closed around it, the willow's branches trembled. A soft wind rose, though. The morning was still, and around her, the sound of whispers filled the air. That night, sleep came slowly to Lenny. The edges of her thoughts were soft, with rain and roots. She dreamt of deep earth and drifting leaves, of songs that didn't need words, and eyes watching her from the mist kind, waiting. She woke before dawn, the sky still ink dark, with only a blush of gray on the horizon. Something was pulling her. Not fear, not urgency, just a quiet summons. Like a forgotten melody she needed to remember. She walked barefoot. The earth was damp, tender under her soles, like it had been crying gently through the night. When she reached the old willow, she saw it immediately. A new symbol had bloomed on the bark, just below the spiral of raindrops. This one looked like an eye closed. She touched it, and once again, she heard a storm. A child crying beneath the tree, lightning slicing the sky like a broken promise. The wind roared, and the tree bent low, cradling the girl with its limbs. Her sobs were not from fear, but from heartbreak. A letter clutched in her hands, torn and soaked, words lost to the rain. The girl pressed her face to the tree's trunk. He left, and the willow, with all its ancient kindness, did not answer, but held her in silence until the storm passed. Leanie's breath trembled as she pulled away. The symbol of the closed eye shimmered, then faded, leaving only bark behind. The willow rustled gently, and this time the sound felt different. More voices, more memories, more echoes rising from the deep. She turned to find the old woman again, but the mist held no figure today. Instead, at the base of the tree, a small wooden box now sat nestled between the roots, old, worn, shaped like a seed pod, unlatched. Inside, a single sheet of parchment and a charcoal stub. The paper had faint writing on it, faded lines, barely legible. She who listens may carry the song forward. The tree remembers, but the remembering needs a voice. Lenny touched the parchment, and a warmth moved through her. Not magic, exactly. More like trust, a quiet agreement sealed long before she was born. She picked up the charcoal and began to write, not a story of her own, but the one she had seen. The storm, the girl, the tree's quiet embrace. When she finished, she placed the paper back into the box. As she closed the lid, the willow shifted, ever so slightly, and a root beside her moved, unfolding like a hand. She stared, wide-eyed. Beneath it, a small hollow, inside another golden leaf. But this one was different. Etched in its veins were words, not symbols, not dreams. Words. Go deeper. That evening, the sky wept again. A slow, tender drizzle that tapped against rooftops like someone knocking on an old friend's door. Lenny didn't go home. She stayed beneath the willow as the rain fell in threads of silver. She pressed the golden leaf to her heart and whispered, "I will." Above her, the tree sighed, a sound like gratitude, like rain learning to fall again. And beneath the bark, the echoes waited, ready to speak to the one who had chosen to listen. Not frightening, not ghostly, but intimate, ancient. Children laughing, a lullaby, sung in a language long forgotten. A woman's voice reciting poetry to no one but the wind. Each whisper passed like breath through the leaves, drifting into the hollow in her chest that she hadn't known was waiting to be filled. Lenny clutched the pendant tighter. Suddenly, she understood. The willow didn't just remember voices. It held them. It kept them safe. And now, it wanted her to carry them. That night, back in her room, Lenny lit a single candle and laid the pendant on her windowsill. The drizzle returned, tapping softly against the glass, as if asking to be let in. She opened her journal. The blank page felt sacred. She wrote without pause. Today, the tree gave me a voice that wasn't mine. And still, it belonged to me. She drew the spiral, the closed eye, the teardrop with the circle. She wrote down every sound she had heard. When she closed the journal, the pendant pulsed once warm against the cool air. Outside, the willow silhouette moved like breath, and Lenny felt something shift inside her. Not an answer, but a beginning. The next morning, the old woman returned. She stepped from the mist like a word unspoken too long. This time, she brought no riddles. Only a question. Are you ready to give back what you've gathered? Lenny looked at the pendant, at her journal, at the place in the tree where voices lived, and she nodded. Beneath the old willow, the earth stirred. A place was being prepared, not for burial, but for planting. The stories were seeds, and Lenny had become the sewer. The morning arrived, wrapped in silver quiet. No rain, no wind, only stillness, as if the world itself had paused to let something sacred rise. Lenny stood once more before the old willow, the pendant around her neck, her journal in hand. The tree was waiting. Not just the branches, not just the roots. The presence within old and patient leaned toward her, not with urgency, but with expectation. She stepped closer, barefoot on the damp grass. The hollow in the trunk had changed. It was wider now, ringed with soft moss and pale blossoms that hadn't been there before. Inside, the soil glowed faintly, not with light, but with memory. The old woman appeared again, quiet as dusk. No longer only an observer. This time, she knelt beside Lenny, placing her wrinkled hand over the earth. "It's time," she said, "to plant what you've carried." Lenny nodded. She opened her journal and tore out 3 pages, the ones where she had recorded the voices of the willow, the crying child, the girl in the storm, the whispered lullabies. Each page she folded gently, carefully, as if folding a wing. She placed them in the hollow. The earth accepted them like breath. The old woman placed her hand over the spot, closed her eyes, and began to hum a low, circular tune that rose from the ground and wrapped the air in warmth. Lenny felt it in her chest. A vibration, a pulling, a release. The pendant on her neck glowed, then cracked, softly, splitting open like a seed pod. Inside, a sliver of bark, thin as a thread, etched with dozens of tiny marks. Lenny placed it into the earth. With the pages, the moment it touched the soil, the willow's branches shuddered, leaves rustled like chimes, and from deep below, a sigh moved through the roots. Then, silence. Heavy. Whole. That evening, a change settled over the village. No one could name it, but people walked a little slower, listened a little longer, smiled at shadows, and those who passed near the willow, those brave enough to pause, said they felt something there, like warmth through stone, like music underwater, like being remembered. Lenny didn't return to the willow the next morning. She didn't need to. Something of her now lived there, planted, protected, part of the great. Remembering that, rose with a drizzle and whispered with the leaves. She walked through the village, a quiet strength in her step, and listened to the wind, to the people, to the stories not yet told, because she knew, beneath the willow's roots, the soil was blooming with memory. And when the next voice came, carrying its grief or wonder or song, the tree would open again, and someone would be there to listen. It had been a week since Lenny last visited the willow, not out of forgetfulness, but reverence. She felt it still, in the hush between footsteps, in the warmth that lingered in her fingertips after touching pages, after listening to people with her whole self. The tree had given her something, a purpose that didn't need applause, a vow not spoken aloud, but lived in silence and care. But on this morning, the sky changed, not with storm, but with a stillness that trembled on the edge of becoming. The air carried a scent older than dew, and when the first drop of rain touched her skin, Lenny knew the tree was calling again. She arrived just as the drizzle began to fall, soft as breath, steady as heartbeat. But the willow wasn't alone. A boy stood beneath its branches, small, barefoot, soaked. He didn't look up as Lenny approached, just stared into the roots, with an expression that made her stop in her tracks. It was the look of someone trying not to break while already breaking. She stepped forward slowly. "Are you all right?" He didn't speak, but he held something in his hands, a folded drawing, creased and damp at the edges. He looked up finally, eyes filled with something beyond tears. "They don't hear me." Lenny knelt beside him. He shrugged everyone. He unfolded the paper. A drawing of a house, a tree, a shadow, standing just outside the door. Crude lines, childlike, but aching. She didn't speak. She didn't ask. She just opened her journal, tore out a clean page, and laid it on the root beside his feet. "Tell it here," she said. He hesitated, then reached for her pencil. No hesitation in his hand. He drew quickly, lines, sharp and trembling. A small figure, a storm, a door, shut tight, a voice with no one to hear it. When he finished, he stared down at it. The rain fell harder. The page blurred, and then the willow moved. A low hum beneath the ground. The roots shifted slightly. The hollow in the trunk opened once more, glowing faintly. The boy gasped. "Is that?" Lenny nodded. She folded his drawing with care, like a relic, and placed it into the hollow. The earth accepted it. The glow deepened, and from the tree came a soft rustling. Not wind, not leaves, a voice. Faint, gentle, a child's laughter, a lullaby, then quiet again. The boy's eyes widened. "It heard me." Lenny looked at him. "Yes, and it kept your voice safe." He stood silently for a moment, then placed his small hand against the bark. When he walked away, he looked lighter, not without sadness, but no longer alone inside it. Lenny stayed behind. She pressed her palm to the same place. The bark was warm, and from somewhere deep below, a new voice stirred, a new memory, not hers, but entrusted to her. And the drizzle fell, not as sorrow, but as song. The rain, at last, was speaking back. The rain softened into mist, as if even the sky was catching its breath. Then he remained beneath the willow long after the boy had gone, her journal resting in her lap, its pages damp but alive, like leaves, collecting stories instead of sunlight. The hollow had closed again. Its glow faded, but the air around it still shimmered with something unseen. That night, Lenny dreamt of roots, not tangled, not dark, but luminous threaded, with light, spreading under homes and hills, carrying voices and gentle pulses like heartbeats through the earth. She woke with a word in her mind, not a name, but a role. A quiet title passed without ceremony. The willow had given it to her. That morning, she returned, but this time, not with questions. She brought offerings. A folded note from her mother's childhood, one she'd found in a drawer. A photograph of her grandfather beside a tree, much like this one. A thread from her grandmother's shawl. Memory doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it hums. She laid them at the base of the tree. The earth did not open. The roots did not stir. But the air around her grew warm. A gust circled once, lifting her hair like a breath of welcome. She placed her hand on the trunk. "I'm here," she said. "I'll stay." From the mist, the old woman appeared again. But today she looked different, lighter. As if something in her had been returned, she knelt beside Lenny, and for the first time, offered her name. "Kala," she said. "I was the last keeper." Before the tree fell silent, Lenny looked up sharply. It stopped listening. Kala nodded, her gaze drifting to the canopy. No, it always listened. But the world stopped offering stories, stopped placing pain into the soil. Everyone held it inside, and the tree, it waited until you came. Lenny felt the truth settle into her chest like dusk. She wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. But for now, she was the bridge between silence and song. That evening, Kala returned with a small lantern, carved from willow wood. Its glass etched with swirling patterns like wind. She handed it to Lenny. "Light it only when someone brings a story." "What does it do?" Lenny asked. Kala smiled. "Nothing you can see, but everything you'll feel." That night, as the drizzle returned once more, a woman came. She didn't speak. She simply held out a letter, unopened, from years ago. Her hands shook as she passed it to Lenny. Lenny lit the lantern. Warm gold spilled out. The woman wept. The willow rustled. The story was accepted. The soil remembered, and beneath the old tree, in drizzle and silence, the keeper's light burned quietly, calling the forgotten home. The lantern hung gently from a low branch, its carved wooden frame swaying with the drizzle, casting quiet ripples of gold across the wet grass. It didn't blaze, it didn't shout, it glowed like a hush, a beacon for those who carried more than they could speak. Every evening now, someone came, a girl with a worn ribbon from her sister's hair, an old man who hadn't sung since his wife passed, a mother who had never said goodbye. Lenny listened. She never rushed, never interrupted. She simply held the silence, and the willow did the rest. Some stories were spoken. Some were drawn. Some were left behind in objects, barely larger than a button or a folded paper star. Each one she placed in the hollow. Each one the soil accepted, and with each offering, the willow shimmered with a life deeper than roots, a soul woven from sorrow and tenderness. One evening, a child arrived barefoot, wearing a too large raincoat and a crown made of twigs. He didn't bring an object, didn't say a word. He simply pointed toward the horizon. "He left that way," he whispered. "My brother. He said he'd come back." Lenny nodded, lit the lantern, and gave the boy a ribbon of white cloth. "Tie it to the tree," she said, "so we can find the way." The boy tied it gently, then stood very still. "Will the tree remember him too?" Lenny looked up through the curtain of drizzle into the shimmering green above. "It already has." Later that night, after all had gone, Lenny sat beneath a willow alone. The lantern still burned, even as the rain fell steadily now, painting the world in silver. She opened her journal, this time not to write someone else's story, but her own. There's a rhythm to pain, a way it echoes, when held in the right hands. The willow doesn't cure it, it simply doesn't let it drown in silence. She paused, and then added, "Maybe that's what a keeper is. Not a healer, but a listener, with open soil in her heart." Across the field, Kella watched from beneath her own shawl, smiling softly. She knew what Lenny hadn't yet realized. The lantern didn't just guide others. It guided the keeper too, because every time it glowed, it lit a path inside her. One she hadn't dared to walk alone, and the old willow, drinking in every voice, grew fuller, greener, as if the drizzle was no longer rain, but language. At midnight, Lenny looked up. The lantern flared, once bright as breath, then dimmed to its warm hush again. Something new had been planted that night, not a story, a promise. The rains paused at last, not in finality, but in reverence. The air was hushed, the way a chapel holds its breath when someone kneels in silence. And the willow, it shimmered, not with water, but with presence. Its leaves hung heavy with voices, its trunk rich with memory. It had become more than tree. It had become echo. Lenny stood beneath its branches, barefoot in the damp grass, lantern in hand. No one came that night. No ribbon, no letter, no folded drawing, only stillness. But Lenny did not leave. She lit the lantern anyway, not because someone needed her, but because she needed the tree. She sat on the same root, as always, let the drizzle of memory trickle through her thoughts, and opened her journal. She traced each page she had filled, each whisper, each ache, turned to offering. Then she reached a blank page, and paused. For the first time in weeks, Lenny didn't know what to write. The silence wasn't empty. It was alive, like the air, right before thunder, but not angry. Listening, she leaned back, eyes closed, and let the hush speak. And it did. Not in words, but in sensation. The warmth of hands once held, the lullaby she'd forgotten her mother used to hum, the quiet sadness her father carried and never explained, the way her childhood room smelled after rain. The tree didn't need stories that night. It gave them somewhere deep in the willow's heart. A low hum began to rise. It wasn't loud, but it was certain, like a drumbeat from the past, reminding her that memory is not a burden. It is a kind of music, and some songs are meant to stay unfinished. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, but no one was there. Only a folded paper crane, resting on the wet grass. She picked it up. It was blank, except for one small phrase written beneath a wing. "I'm listening to..." Then he looked around. Still no one. And yet, she smiled, because it didn't matter who had left it. The message had been received. The echo had landed. That night, as she walked home, she kept the crane in her pocket and the lantern unlit, because the light now lived in her chest. The willow had done its work, and for the first time, Lenny understood. Not all stories need to be told aloud. Some just need a place to rest, a place to echo. The rains paused at last, not in finality, but in reverence. The air was hushed, the way a chapel holds its breath when someone kneels in silence. And the willow, it shimmered, not with water, but with presence. Its leaves hung heavy with voices, its trunk rich with memory. It had become more than tree. It had become echo. Lenny stood beneath its branches, barefoot in the damp grass, lantern in hand. No one came that night. No ribbon, no letter, no folded drawing, only stillness. But Lenny did not leave. She lit the lantern anyway, not because someone needed her, but because she needed the tree. She sat on the same root, as always, let the drizzle of memory trickle through her thoughts, and opened her journal. She traced each page she had filled, each whisper, each ache, turned to offering. Then she reached a blank page, and paused. For the first time in weeks, Lenny didn't know what to write. The silence wasn't empty. It was alive, like the air, right before thunder, but not angry. Listening, she leaned back, eyes closed, and let the hush speak. And it did. Not in words, but in sensation. The warmth of hands once held, the lullaby she'd forgotten her mother used to hum, the quiet sadness her father carried and never explained, the way her childhood room smelled after rain. The tree didn't need stories that night. It gave them somewhere deep in the willow's heart. A low hum began to rise. It wasn't loud, but it was certain, like a drumbeat from the past, reminding her that memory is not a burden. It is a kind of music, and some songs are meant to stay unfinished. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, but no one was there. Only a folded paper crane, resting on the wet grass. She picked it up. It was blank, except for one small phrase written beneath a wing. "I'm listening to..." Then he looked around. Still no one. And yet, she smiled, because it didn't matter who had left it. The message had been received. The echo had landed. That night, as she walked home, she kept the crane in her pocket and the lantern unlit, because the light now lived in her chest. The willow had done its work, and for the first time, Lenny understood. Not all stories need to be told aloud. Some just need a place to rest, a place to echo. Morning came without a sound. The drizzle had passed, not vanished, just folded itself back into the clouds, as if the sky had finished whispering what it came to say. Lenny stood before the willow one last time. Though nothing about it said goodbye, its roots were thick with memory, its branches humming with invisible threads woven from voices and quiet offerings. The lantern still hung, unlit, but it didn't need to burn. The tree had become the flame. Kala arrived just before sunrise, shawl wrapped tightly, but face soft. She joined Lenny without words, and the two of them stood there. 2 generations of keepers, one beginning, one letting go. Finally, Kala spoke. "The tree doesn't need us every day," Lenny nodded. "But someone might." Kala smiled gently. "Then go to them." Lenny understood. The willow would always be here, but not everyone who needed a place to unburden their heart would find their way to this field. So she folded her journal shut, tied it with a strand of bark, and laid it gently in the hollow of the tree. Not an ending, a beginning for someone else. As she stepped back, the willow did something it had never done before. It bloomed, not with flowers, but with memory. The leaves shimmered with 1,000 hues, each flickering with faces, moments, griefs turned into grace. Lenny saw the boy's drawing, the woman's unopened letter, the old man's quiet song, even her own childhood laughter, floating in the shape of light. The tree wasn't only holding stories, it was becoming them, and the world around it. Even the sky leaned in to listen. As Lenny walked away from the willow for the last time, she did not feel empty. She felt full, like a cup brimming with silence that nourished. She passed through the village, leaving no trail, but carrying something behind her, an invisible thread, tugging gently on those who felt unseen. And wherever she paused, wherever someone whispered something they'd never said aloud, a hush would fall. Not heavy, not haunted, but sacred. And in that hush, the memory of a tree, and a keeper who once listened until the rain itself learned how to sing. Seasons passed, the rain returned, then left, then returned again. But it was never the same. It had changed. It carried warmth now. It listened as it fell. It remembered, and though the villagers still passed by the old field, fewer and fewer paused by the willow, not because it was forgotten, but because its work had spread. It no longer needed to be visited. It had rooted itself in people. Children grew up hearing whispers beneath the branches. Some swore the tree glowed in the fog. Others said they heard lullabies when no one else was near. A girl once pressed her cheek against the bark and cried without knowing why, only that she felt heard. A man returned after many years, his beard thick with time, and placed a stone at the tree's base, with a name carved gently into it. He left smiling. The willow, ever quiet, ever drenched in memory, remained, but something had shifted in the world. More people listened, more people paused before speaking. More stories were shared with no expectation of reply. The hush that had once lived only beneath its canopy had found a home in every gentle heart. And Lenny, she was never seen in the village again. But sometimes, on the edge of at the rim of dusk, a figure would appear in another town, carrying a satchel of blank pages and a small wooden lantern that glowed without fire. She never introduced herself. She just listened, and when she left, a child would find a folded crane on their windowsill, or a stranger would hear their sorrow whispered back in birdsong, or a forgotten tree would bloom for no reason at all. Some say the keeper lives in the wind, not that the drizzle is her way of arriving, that every echo in the rain is another voice finding its way home. And the willow, it stands still. But if you ever pass beneath it, and it starts to rain, speak softly. You're not alone. Someone is still listening. The willow still stood, bent in grace, wreathed in hush. Its leaves no longer sought the wind. They were the wind. But something new had begun. Far beyond the field, in another part of the world, where hills folded like blankets over dreaming villages, a sapling appeared. No one planted it. No one remembered it being there. Yet there it stood, slim, silver-barked, its tiny leaves trembling with a quiet rhythm. And when the rain came, it did not run off the leaves. It paused there, like a listener. A child found the sapling first. She had been walking alone, her shoes soaked, her pockets filled with broken buttons and a feather. She sat beside the tree without knowing why. And when she placed the feather at its base, she felt something shift, not in the air, in her. The sadness, she didn't have words, for settled like a bird into the soil. Later that week, another arrived, a baker's apprentice with flour still on his sleeves. He carried a torn recipe, one he could never finish because his mother had never told him the last ingredient. He laid it down beside the feather and smiled, as if, somehow, that was enough. No lantern, no keeper, no carved roots or secret hollows, just a sapling in a place no one remembered noticing. But word spread, not by voice, by feeling. Somehow, people began to find it just when they needed to. Not to be answered, just to be heard. Far away, under the original willow, something bloomed again. This time, a single golden leaf. It glowed gently, then fell, and vanished before it touched the ground, and in another place entirely, the sapling gained its first golden leaf. The story was traveling. They call it the wandering root now. Some say it finds you, others say it grows from your own longing, but all who sit beside it feel the same thing: a hush, a warmth, a listening that requires no words. And in the drizzle that sometimes follows, some claim they've seen her. The girl with the lantern, walking slowly, quiet as a memory, with the wind at her back and stories in her pocket, still listening, still planting. It began with a whisper, not from her mouth, but from the leaves of the second tree. The sapling had grown taller now, its trunk more sure, its canopy wide enough to gather shadows, and when the wind moved through it, it spoke. Not in words, in reminders. A ribbon left on a fence, a photograph curled at the edges, a dream someone forgot but still carried in their bones. The villagers nearby began to call it the listening tree. And soon they started leaving behind small pieces of themselves: a broken wristwatch, a half-written poem, a thimble with thread still wrapped around it. No one explained why. They simply knew this tree could carry something forward when they no longer could. Far away, Lenny stood in a dry field. No rain, no willow, just cracked soil and a long, empty road. She closed her eyes, held her lantern in both hands, and whispered, "Here, too." When she opened her eyes, she knelt and pressed her palm into the earth. Nothing happened. Not at first. But when she stood and walked on, a single green shoot began to rise behind her, thin, soft, trembling in the wind. Another listening place, another beginning. Over the years, more trees appeared, sometimes in forests, sometimes in forgotten corners behind schools, sometimes on balconies where someone had planted a seed without knowing why. These trees didn't speak in bark or bloom. They spoke in what they received. The small things, the quiet offerings, and everywhere they stood, something changed. Arguments ended softer. Children asked better questions. Old men remembered songs. And in the rain, always in the rain, someone would feel the urge to listen more than they spoke. Back beneath the first willow, the original keeper's journal, now softened with time, remained tucked in the hollow. A child found it one summer morning. She was no older than Lenny had been when she first came to the tree. She didn't know the words, but she traced the lines with her fingers and felt the echo. And then she wrote her own page. "Today I cried, and no one stopped me. The tree just let me be. I think that's what love is." She signed only her first name, then closed the journal and left it behind. But something new bloomed that day. The first leaf with her name written across it in gold. Now, when rain falls gently over quiet trees, and a hush rises between thunder and thought, some say the leaves are speaking again. Not to teach, not to warn, but to remember, because a story doesn't belong to one tree. It belongs to all who need a place to let go and begin again. She came back every afternoon, the girl with quiet shoes and ink on her fingers. No one knew her name in the village. She lived just beyond the ridge, in a crooked cottage that smelled of cinnamon and mothballs. But the tree knew her, and that was enough. She called it Murmur. Not the willow, not the old tree, just Murmur. Because that's how it sounded when the wind moved through its branches, like someone trying to say something too soft to hear, but too important to ignore. Each day, she wrote a little more in the old journal. "Today I thought about my grandfather's laugh. I can't remember the sound, only how it made me feel like the sun through window glass. I said something mean to a friend and didn't know why. The tree didn't scold me, just dropped a yellow leaf into my lap. She never read the older pages," she said. "That's the tree's memory, not mine." One day, she brought a friend, a boy who didn't speak much. He had wide eyes and nervous fingers. She handed him the journal, but he shook his head. So instead, he tied a piece of string around the branch closest to the ground. It fluttered. The wind answered in kind. That was his offering. And that night, the rain returned. Not a storm, just a quiet drizzle, like a lullaby that didn't need lyrics. The next morning, a golden leaf had grown from the string. The boy gasped. The girl just nodded. That means the tree listened. Over time, others came. A girl who lost her sister. A boy with too many questions and not enough sleep. An old woman with a photograph she never showed to anyone until she tied it to the tree. And always, if the silence felt right and the heart was open, the golden leaves came. They didn't last forever. They fell gently after a day or two, turning to mist before they touched the ground. But before they vanished, they shimmered with names, memories, phrases never said aloud. Some people tried to catch them. No one ever could. The girl who now called herself Mira grew taller. Her shoes got louder, her ink stains deeper. But every afternoon, she still came. Not always to write, sometimes just to sit, to listen, to let the hush hold her. And the willow murmur remained. It didn't age. It deepened. Its roots stretched so far, they began to echo in other trees. Its memory bloomed like invisible stars between leaves. And always, when the first drop of drizzle kissed the bark, a single golden leaf would appear. Even if no one was watching, the story continues whenever someone returns to listen without needing an answer. The seasons turned again. The drizzle returned with a softer rhythm, as if the sky had learned to breathe slower. And Myra, now almost grown, began to walk differently. Not faster, not louder, just more grounded. Like someone who carried silence in her pockets. She still visited the willow, still called it murmur, but she had started doing something new. Each time she came, she brought with her a small lantern. It didn't burn with flame. Inside, it was a single golden leaf, pressed gently between two panes of glass. The leaf pulsed faintly, like a heart, remembering to speak. She didn't show it to anyone, not yet. But when she passed through town, people turned and paused, not because they saw the light, but because they felt it, like how one turns toward music. That hasn't begun playing yet. One evening, a child followed her, barefoot, curious. She didn't speak until Mira reached the field. Is the tree magic? Mira smiled gently. No. It's listening. The child frowned. Listening to what? Mira turned toward the tree, its branches dripping with soft rain. To what hurts. To what's hidden. To what matters, but hasn't been spoken. The child tilted her head. Like a secret. Mira nodded. Like a secret that wants to become a seed. That night, Mira gave the child her lantern, just for a moment. And the golden leaf inside shimmered brighter. The child clutched it carefully, as if afraid it would break. Will it ever stop glowing? Only when it's been passed on enough times. Mira knelt beside her. Until it's not just mine. Until it's everyone's. Over time, the lantern did just that. It passed, from hand to hand, from village to village. Sometimes it vanished for weeks, but always, it returned just when someone needed to remember what it meant to be heard. And when it returned to Mira, she would find the golden leaf slightly different, etched with new names, new lines, new invisible truths. Not hers. And as she grew older, Mira began to visit trees that weren't willows. A pine, old and gnarled. An olive tree on a hillside. Even a single stubborn flower growing through the cracks in a forgotten alley. Wherever she paused, people gathered, not because of her words, but because of her hush. That sacred, soft hush that made others believe their story belonged in the world, even if no one clapped when they told it. And the original willow, it continued. It shed its leaves. It bloomed anew. It held the journal still, now swollen with pages and petals and poems. But above all, it listened. Even now, even still, the lantern had no map, no name written on it, no string to pull it back. Yet it always found someone, sometimes left quietly at a doorstep, sometimes handed over in the middle of a conversation without a word, sometimes discovered in the hollow of a tree that had never listened before until now. Inside it, the golden leaf shimmered, and with each new hand, it changed, just slightly. A line appeared, a curve, a memory that hadn't yet become language. It never needed to explain itself. It simply arrived. The first stop, a rooftop violinist in a small seaside town. A man played the violin every dusk, not for a crowd, only for the birds. He had once performed for great halls, but the silence of an empty rooftop soothed him more than applause ever could. One night, as the fog rolled in, he found the lantern beside his bow. Inside, the golden leaf. He played a different melody that evening, not louder, just more whole, and the seagulls circled closer, not to interrupt, but to listen. The second stop, a girl who hadn't spoken in weeks. She found it behind her school library, where moss grew between forgotten bricks. No one knew what had silenced her, not even she. But when she held the lantern, the golden leaf pulsed softly, and for the first time in days, she exhaled. Not a word, not a sound, just a sigh that felt like belonging. That night, she wrote a note and slipped it beneath her mother's pillow. I don't know what I need, but I think the light does. The third stop, a cemetery gardener. He found it under a bench, just before sunrise. He was used to tending the silence, pruning it, sweeping it, watching people walk through it with bowed heads. But when he held the lantern, he remembered his wife's voice. Not as sound, but as warmth. He sat by her gravestone and whispered all the things he'd never said. When he finished, the golden leaf inside the lantern turned silver for a moment, just once, and then glowed gold again. The lantern changes each time the lantern has passed. The leaf gathers a whisper. These whispers do not speak loudly. They do not command. They wait for the next hand, the next hush, the next person brave enough to carry a light they do not fully understand. And through it all, the drizzle comes and goes, gentle as breath, persistent as time. Mira, watching from afar sometimes. In her sleep, Mira feels it, the lantern pulsing softly somewhere in the world, as if part of her heartbeat has drifted into someone else's chest for a while. She does not chase it. She simply trusts, because that is what keepers do. They listen, they let go, and they believe the world is full of small, soft places where stories can be heard without needing to be solved. His name was Reain. He lived in a town where windows stayed shut, and people wore coats of silence, buttoned high to the throat, never quite removed. Reain didn't mind the quiet. He had learned to live in the corners of things. Between pages no one read, behind laughter that never reached him. He didn't seek the lantern. It found him, tucked behind a stone wall after the rain, its golden light flickering through the mist. Hicho walked past it, but something in him, some ache without a name, reached out and touched it, and the moment he did, he felt seen in a way that scared him. So he hid it. He wrapped the lantern in old sweaters and buried it in the shed behind his home. If no one sees it, he whispered, then it can't leave me. He visited it in secret, sometimes just to sit beside it in the dark, and the golden leaf pulsed on, soft as breath, patient as moonlight behind clouds. But something strange began to happen. Each time he left the shed, he heard whispers, not outside, inside. His own voice, but gentler, telling the truth he hadn't dared to admit. I don't want to be alone anymore. I'm tired of pretending I don't care. I miss the way my mother used to hum when she thought no one could hear. The light shifts after weeks of silence. Reain returned to the shed one night and gasped. The golden leaf had cracked. Not broken, not fading, cracked like something inside wanted to grow. And from that split in the glowing leaf, a soft silver shimmer emerged. It didn't speak, but it felt like a question. Reain whispered, "What if I don't know how to share you?" The light pulsed once, as if to say, "You don't have to know, you just have to let go." The first sharing round didn't choose someone noble, or kind, or brave. He chose a boy at school who sat near the back and kicked chairs when he was nervous. Someone as bruised as him. He didn't speak a single word. He just placed the lantern on the boy's desk and walked away. The other boy stared at it, touched the cracked golden leaf, and something in his eyes changed. Not softened, but opened. That was enough. Back to the tree far away, beneath the old willow, the journal fluttered open on its own. A new page wrote itself in faint gold ink. He thought hiding it would keep it safe, but even light kept in a box eventually finds a way to leak through the seams. And that night, in a dozen trees across distant lands, a single golden leaf appeared. Each one cracked, each one glowing, each one waiting to be shared.